Hi, everyone. I'm the director for our New Zealand registered not-for-profit charitable trust called Common Knowledge. And we have the privilege of holding all of the birth and birth coaching skills that hundreds of fathers and mothers developed in the early 1970s. And I'm doing this You and Childbirth series. So today I want to talk about you and obstetricians in terms of natural health, natural birth. And I'm going to do other series about you and obstetricians and other stuff because we need to really get this clear. So we live in the present now. We're modern people, but humans have a very, very long history. They have a global history of multiple diverse cultural groups and multiple health systems. Every culture has its own health system. It's only recently in the 20th century that really, modern medicine, late 19th century, 20th century, really became prevalent. And it became prevalent because it was one of those indicators for those of us who live in modern countries, or what were called first world countries, as compared to third world countries. So other indicators of why we were privileged had to do with things like electricity, indoor plumbing, refrigeration. So modern medicine represents to many people a movement from being where there's no health care except for the traditional health care into modern health care. Why do people want modern health care? Well, they want modern health care. One is for a global reason. So when I was a child, I grew up during the polio epidemic. Polio vaccines were developed in my generation. I had a family member die of pneumonia prior to penicillin. If you go to any cemetery in the world that has headstones, 20 to 30% of our children died before the age of 5 because there were no immunizations. There were no antibiotics. Women didn't have birth control. So we had lots of kids to replace the ones that we lost. And pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events and are only realistically normal life events and natural and physiological when you actually admit that that can include the good or the bad, the easy or the complicated. And when modern medicine evolved more and more, it was a striving for our modern societies to have solutions to health issues that we just didn't have before. We're in a COVID crisis right now. Look at how our health systems are struggling, and yet look at how our health systems are coming up with a vaccine, whether we like it or not, or better ways to treat COVID early on, or even when it's in a crisis. Imagine what we'd be living in if there was no modern health system with this virus going around the world. We'd be in an entirely different situation. When, in my lifetime, in the 50 years I've been involved in childbirth, things have changed dramatically. When I gave birth in 1970, in the United States, there was a childbirth trend, also based on evidence-based practice and guidelines to practice and standards of care. And that was basically follow your doctor's orders. If we go back a generation, when I was born after the Second World War, and a generation before that, and a generation into the early 20th century, there was no penicillin. In New Zealand, where our trust is, in 1920, New Zealand had the highest rate of maternal mortality deaths due to sepsis because there was no way really to prevent what was called milk fever or sepsis after the birth. So we, as people in societies, we want to limit our risks, particularly people who live in first world or modern countries. People who live in third world or undeveloped countries, they live with the risks, and they live with the problems that come from the risks and the tragedies that come from the problems. So most women in modern countries will seek obstetrical care. If you're in a country where there's midwifery care, your health system may have you go through midwifery care, and those midwives will be integrated into the modern healthcare system. The childbirth trend of the day, the evidence-based practice of the day, which has changed since the 1970s. I've lived through 3 of them. So when you're dealing with your obstetrician, depending on what country you're in, you have a relationship with them, whether you like them or not. They have a relationship with you, whether you like them or not. And here's the reality. If you go into their sphere, which is the hospital, they are obligated usually by laws and rules and regulations, guidelines to practice, to do assessments, monitoring, and procedures. And they're doing those things to identify risks, to prevent the multiple risks that can exist from becoming the very much fewer problems, and from preventing those much fewer problems from becoming tragedies. And they do that in the context of the society around them. Many societies now, women use birth control. We are having many fewer children. We don't want to risk those fewer children. So we immunize them. We give them antibiotics. We use medical care during our labors, our births, having cesareans, because we want to protect our children. And the obstetricians are more than happy to provide that service. So when we look at ourselves from our trust viewpoint, we are always looking at birth from how we as, consumers of delivery of service and maternity care, how we approach that. And from the early 70s, the fathers and mothers who developed the Birthing Better skills approached all births, because 100% of pregnant women will give birth one way or another, as though this is ultimately one of the highest human activities. And it's infrequent, and it's a one-off activity, and it can't be repeated, and you can't practice to it. And it's life-transforming, it's transitional into parenting. So Birthing Better mothers and fathers, instead of taking a philosophical approach that either sided with the philosophy of modern medicine and obstetrical care or sided with the philosophy of the natural birth movement, we sided with the reality that 100% of pregnant women are going to give birth one way or another, and it's an activity that only us as women do with our baby. And us, women, doing an activity, we will always do that activity better when we have some level of skills. So Birthing Better fathers and mothers developed skills. We developed skills to cope with the natural occurring pain of contractions far better than we were able to do when we took Lamaze and Bradley classes in the United States in the 60s and 70s. But then the cesarean rate was 4.5%, because obstetricians, which were a fairly new occupation in the 50s, and in, I think, Europe only in the mid-1800s, that they knew that there were 2 elements: women suffering, women who lacked skills to cope and to manage, and risks that could become problems. And thankfully, lots of risks, many fewer problems, many, many fewer tragedies. And so we first focused on just coping, because risks were considered to be normal, natural, and physiological, and the obstetrical profession didn't have the skills as they do today. And those skills today evolved because of our demands as consumers and because of the curiosity of the medical profession. Right or wrong, good or bad, it is what it is. And so we then started in the 80s to develop skills to prepare our body for birth from 24 weeks onward, because we could see that when our first stage, our dilation phase of labor, started to be excessive of 12, 15, 24 hours, or our second stage pushing was excessive of 2, 3, 4 hours, that if we were in the hospital under obstetrical care, they were more likely to do more assessments, monitoring, and procedures. And if we wanted to not have what is now called this cascade of interventions, then when we became more highly skilled to do this activity, then we found that certain things happened to the positive. One, we just coped better. And because all birthing better skills were developed by fathers and mothers, we shared this common set of skills together, which we could apply at every breath in and every breath out, and our bodies in some posture or position, so we could always relax and soften and use breathing skills. And by working together, we coped and managed and felt more in control of the natural occurring pain of contractions. And because we had prepared our body, which is a container, and we have a big object in the container, and particularly at the first birth, that big object has to open our container for the first time. And if we could prepare our body and we could open up and stay soft and mobile in our body, then our babies came down through and out our body more efficiently. And when our babies came down more efficiently and we coped better, and the people around us, like the obstetricians or the midwives or the labor and delivery nurses around us, what they saw were women and men coping well and working through birth. And they enjoyed it. They loved working with skilled families. And what we also discovered was if we came into our birth with one or multiple risks, and the obstetrician and the staff, nurses or midwives, could see us cope well, and if the assessments were looking good and the monitoring was looking good, they were very relaxed with letting us continue on our way. Where obstetricians and midwives and labor and delivery nurses get into that let's fix this mode is primarily when they see women not coping. They don't want women to suffer. The partner doesn't want to see the woman suffering. Women don't want to suffer. And when women lack skills, which they have since the 1980s to today, then obstetricians and midwives and labor and delivery nurses see a lot of women suffering. And a lot of women being invited to or being given or asking for pain relief. So they use pain relief, we as women use pain relief in labor because we lack skills to cope with the natural, physiological, and normal pain of labor contractions. Should we do that instead of using pain relief? Our trust doesn't have an opinion, it's your birth. What we know from 50 years and tens of thousands of families who use skills is that when we are skilled, we cope better, and because we birth more efficiently, our labor's aren't as long, so we don't get as tired. And the obstetricians who see us love it, and they are very negotiable, very negotiable. Yet we have to, in our prenatal conversations with obstetricians who may be hesitant because they have been bombarded with the natural birth movement and birth plans, which they can't decipher, is they want to know what it's going to be like on the day of the birth, which is right. So if you go to appointments and you say to them, look, I'm coming to you because I want you to safeguard the health and well-being of myself and my baby. And I'm on board with that. And I'm also learning skills with my partner. I know that skills may not prevent risks from becoming problems, but I really believe that if I use skills to cope with the natural occurring pain, and you see and hear me cope, and you see my partner and I working together, and if I have risks and the assessments show that everything is fine and I want to proceed in what I'm doing, then I'd really like your support. In other words, if you and I agree that I need more monitoring, or that for some reason my baby and I need procedures done, then we're going to still continue to use skills to work through our baby's birth journey. And I'm going to agree with you on that. What I really am doing is coming into this safe environment just in case. And at the same time, I really want to experience this natural birth. I believe that the skills will help me cope, manage, deal with, stay on top of, feel in control of the natural occurring pain of labor, particularly because I'm going to bring a skilled partner in. And so I just would like to work together on this. But trust me, if I feel there's a problem with myself or my baby, and if you or staff feel there's a problem that's definable for me and my baby, of course I'm going to use medical care. That's why I'm coming to you. And when we talk like that, when we negotiated like that with our obstetricians, we could take multiple high risks into a skilled birth. We didn't know whether the assessments were going to show there was going to be a problem, but we have success on our side just because there are multiple risks and infinitely fewer problems. And when there are problems, most of them resolve without there being a tragedy. So we had sort of statistics, not the research statistics, but we had statistics on the side. And doctors know that. Staff know that. So and they know that because they see thousands and thousands and thousands of births. Many people have risks, and they know from their experience that you can have a woman who has multiple risks, 12 risks. She's overweight, high blood pressure, this, that, and yet she can just cope beautifully with birth. The birth can just spit out a kid. They know that. They also know from experience that very healthy women who have done everything to be healthy can get into labor, not cope. Their bodies are firm and tight, and this big object can't open them. And after 24 or 36 hours, and the woman is absolutely raggedly exhausted, nobody wants to see women suffer. So if you want a natural birth with an obstetrician or with a midwife, right, become skilled. Now, our trust has been saying this. Our trust was developed in 1995. I've been saying this since the 70s. And this is where it becomes complicated. Obstetricians that saw skilled families, and they saw skilled families in my generation who took Lamaze and Bradley classes. But Lamaze and Bradley focused on low-risk women to achieve a natural birth, pain-free labor with no medical care. So if Lamaze and Bradley had said 100% of pregnant women are going to give birth, we want everybody to use skills, so we just reduce the suffering, so women cope better and stay on top of it. Then obstetricians and midwives and labor and delivery nurses in the 60s and 70s would have said skills work to achieve that. But because the goals were to be anti-medical, no medical care, this natural birth, which was basically became defined as easy and good and low risk and pain-free, then the obstetricians and labor and delivery nurses and midwives were taught to look to see if that was achieved. And that wasn't achieved. And then everything has been chaotic since then. And I'm going to do another talk about the reflection on the unintended negative consequences of modern medicine and the natural birth movement, because they don't intend to have negative consequences, yet they do, and we are here where we are now. So we know from vast experience that as we developed skills and we applied skills, that our obstetricians and labor and delivery nurses and midwives were just bloody grateful to see skilled women. When I gave birth in 1970, probably 7 out of 10 families were skilled in the United States because Lamaze is taught in every hospital. But as I said, the focus wasn't on reducing suffering. Our generation did reduce suffering, so my generation of people felt good about birth. We had no choice. So we had every assessment, monitoring, and procedure done to us without a choice if we went into the hospital and had obstetrical care. It was follow your doctor's orders. So but that changed in the 80s, which I've talked about in other ones. Complicated. So I don't want to do that. But now women have more choices, and they lack skills because of this unintended negative consequence of the natural birth movement that said, birth is natural and instinctive. Women know how to do it. They just need to be left alone and say no to medical care. So it became complicated. So fewer childbirth classes taught skills. They started to teach information so you could make choices, which meant that instead of seeing 7 out of 10 skilled families, now obstetricians and midwives and labor and delivery nurses will see some good births, maybe 1 or 2 out of 10. And then they'll see the rest of women just getting through it. And if you go to Facebook, you'll see it all the time. How women couldn't cope. They used epidurals, they used epidurals, they used epidurals, they used epidurals. And why are we using them? There's nothing wrong. There's nothing morally wrong with using pain relief. However, if we want to work with an obstetrician with a natural birth, meaning that can include risks, that can even include problems and sadly tragedies, and natural occurring pain of labor, then what we need to do is to have skills. We need to grow a skilled birthing population, which means all of you that watch this have a shared responsibility with our trust, because you have to give a message to people that when you're pregnant, it's just normal and natural to learn some skills and use those skills to work through your baby's birth journey. And thankfully, when we say that as a trust, we're not just focused on birthing better skills, we're focused on any skills. Everybody should be skilled to birth their baby, whether you're with an obstetrician or whether you're driving to the hospital, breathing and relaxing, being prepped and in surgery. You're birthing your baby. Your baby's here. You're parenting your baby by bringing skills into that birth. The same way you're going to parent your child after the birth with skills. The difference is that when we use skills to birth our baby, then we can let birth go after it's finished and apply our attention to parenting a baby out of our body. When we lack skills in birth and we're overwhelmed, then we hold on to what's unresolved and we can't focus entirely on our children. And we know this because we've had 50 years of experience with this, right? Us, women and men, we talk about this. We talk about the continuity of self, that prior to being pregnant, we all feel skilled, then we get pregnant, and everybody goes like that. And there's no emphasis on becoming skilled or skilled to prepare your body or skills to birth your baby. And so we have this void, and then baby pops out and we're expected to be skilled. So we need to change that. And we change it by changing the childbirth message. That it's just normal and natural when you're pregnant to learn some skills and to use those skills to birth your baby. So when you're working with your obstetrician, you have been told, and this is one of the negative, unintended consequences, but it was very articulated by the natural birth movement, which is very anti-medical. You know, obstetricians want to go play golf. They want to hurry you along. They're wandering around with knives and wanting to cut you open. You know, honestly, they're mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters. They're just human beings who are trained at a very high level of medical care. And they're doing their best to safeguard you and your baby. And they're doing it within an environment called a hospital that has its own standards of care. And so you're going into that when you choose an obstetrician. They don't think you're skilled, and they don't care. It's not that they're not caring. They have skills to help you if you can't cope with pain. They have skills to assess and monitor if there are any risks, and procedures if risks begin to present themselves. So if you want to have a natural birth, you are still going to have assessments and monitoring. You may have less procedures. And what is going to be the determining factor? Your willingness to become highly skilled in using those skills so that they see you coping, and your willingness to negotiate with them before birth and reassure them that you're choosing to have a natural birth under their care means that you have this partnership relationship where you honor the skills they have learned and you are going to become skilled to do this activity. And you are going to do this activity in the most natural way as long as you and your baby are fine, based on the assessments and monitoring that the hospital or the obstetrician or the staff are required to do. They will negotiate with you. You are an individual. Claim your space. Don't expect your partner to protect the sacred space of labor. You are the only one, me, the only one. So when I gave birth to my last child, I went into labor 8 weeks early. Do you think I wanted that? I was in some strange town. I hadn't met an obstetrician beforehand, yet I was very highly skilled because I had developed these skills with families. And so when I went into the hospital, I used my skills. They could see that. The staff and the obstetrician could see I used skills. And so they began to work with me. And they worked with me as I worked with them. So they wanted to put an IV in my arm to try to stop labor. I didn't resist that. I just kept using my skills. Every time I checked myself, the obstetrician wanted to check me too. I was fine with that. I knew what was going on in my crotch. I didn't care whether she did. She wanted to know? Fine. When it came to my birthing my child, they didn't want me to birth in the room I was in. They wanted me in theater. That was okay. They helped me continue to birth because I was using skills. And I just continued to get on with the birth. And they let me catch my baby. They didn't have any issue with that, right? Because my behavior indicated to them, to the obstetrician and the staff, that I was fine and the assessments were fine. My 8-week premature baby was fine. And after the birth, and they wanted to take him away and put him in a nursery to make certain he was all right, I didn't argue with them. I couldn't go in and see him for 4 hours. I didn't argue with them. I had come to the hospital because where I was staying wanted me in the hospital. That was fine. I just continued to use my skills, and when I went to see him, I explained to him, hey, kid, you didn't get born to live in a white box. When you get out, I'll show you the birds and the butterflies and all the sounds. Because I was skilled, they responded. So if you want a natural birth with an obstetrician, treat them as human beings and negotiate with them. And then be a skilled birthing woman with a skilled birthing partner. I didn't have a skilled birthing partner. I just had me. So I could do it. You just have to do it. Is it hard work? Did I love labor? Hate it. Absolutely hate it. Really painful, right? And I knew that if my behavior began to crack and I began to look like I wasn't coping, that they would come in with their natural wanting to help me. So did you get this? We got to build a skilled birthing population. All obstetricians are going to negotiate. Hospitals, less so, but they have a variation on the theme. They have to do their assessments, but if they do them every 2 hours and you'd like them to wait for another half an hour, they're okay with that. If they do an internal, you can negotiate. Do they need you to be having a contraction line on your back? The doctor who checked me didn't. I did it squatting on the bed, right? She just had to do it. Who knows why? That was all right. So you just need to negotiate from a skilled place, not from a staunch place of, I want this and I expect you to give it to me. And that's one of the negative, unintended consequences of the choice-based childbirth trend. And the message that's being given to women is that you know what your birth's going to be like and they should give you the birth you want. And you don't know your birth's going to be like, because there's no way to know what your birth's going to be like. And babies don't come to plan. You may know what you want, but in the tens of thousands of women I've talked to globally, I would say almost none of us had the birth we wanted or expected. It was always very, very different. Yet when we used skills to do the activities that unfolded, we empowered ourselves. So that's what I want to leave you with. See you again later, and thanks for watching.